Good morning to everyone who is attending our Oasis Spaces digital event here at the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum. We are happy to have you virtually attending, and this is our first panel of the day. I want to start by thanking the African American Heritage Commission for sponsoring this panel, as well as setting up this exhibit that we are going to be talking about and hear about today. So this particular panel will be about the creation of the exhibit. And we are honored to have with us researcher and doctoral student Lisa Withers and commissioner from the African American Heritage Commission, Deloris Rhodes. I want to welcome you both here and thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to us. But I do want to very quickly point out that we have the exhibit, the Charlotte Hawkins Brown Museum. We have it for an additional week or so. And so if you would like to come by and see it after being interested in the subject, the Green Book, if you're interested to come and see the exhibit over the next couple of days, please check our website and our Facebook page, and we would love to have you here. But I wanted to start with just sort of beginning questions. When did the both of you learn about the Green Book?
Commissioner Rhodes, would you like to go first?
Well, interestingly, that is a trick question, I think, because I learned of the Green Book when I was experiencing the Green Book. In 1966, my husband was a commission officer from North Carolina A&T, and many of the young officers were given a Green Book as a guide of places to go and stay. It had been around for a long time, but it still existed. And he was fortunate enough to have a copy of it. So I have lived through the Green Book by looking for places that were welcoming for us to have lunch, to stay over, or go to the bathroom on our travels. So that's when I first learned about the Green Book in 1966.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us. It's very notable and interesting to be able to experience something like that when I think people otherwise might be learning about it differently for the first time and didn't have something like that. Lisa?
I think for me, as someone who is a member of a younger generation, I was born after the Green Book ceased publication. So I didn't hear about it until the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission launched the project. And so that was my introduction to it. And in learning about it, what it was, I realized that it was something that fell within a broader scope of the content areas that I study, which is African American 20th century history more broadly.
So we have two different coming to learning about the Green Book in terms of Deloris having experienced it when it was being published and actively being used, and Lisa as a researcher studying it. And the purpose of this panel is to talk about how those combined and more views created the exhibit that we have on our site at the moment. So we'll start with Deloris. You're a commissioner for the African American Heritage Commission. What does that role entail for you?
Well, first of all, that role can go in various directions. In the role of the commissioner from the North Carolina African American Heritage, we were appointed by the governor. We knew that we provide outreach for many practitioners of the art and history in North Carolina. We extend ourselves. We support practitioners. We are aware of what's going on in North Carolina. We connect with them to see if we can be of help or assistance or cooperate in any way. And I think that role for me was something that was right down my line. As a formal assistant superintendent, when you're all over the state looking for teachers, and my African American teachers were so hard to find, I was always asking about, oh, who live here? And I had so many questions about the setting throughout North Carolina. And so it means that I have to constantly be on my toes, looking to see how I can assist, and then take the information back to the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission with my other commissioners and Angela Thorpe, and we talk about just how we can provide additional assistance.
Mhm. That's wonderful. I love being able to talk more with members of the commission, and I encourage everyone who's viewing this panel today to go onto their website. They have a lot of information about the Green Book that we'll be sharing throughout the day as well, but keep following them. They do amazing work, and it's good to be involved and see what's nearby that you can further participate in, such as this panel right now. So for the Green Book exhibit that we have, what was the motivation behind this particular project and exhibit that we have?
Is this to me or Lisa?
This is to you, Commissioner Rhodes.
Okay.
My apologies.
The work was initiated by a Dr. Alicia McGill, and she was a professor, a historian, professor at North Carolina, NC State. That's where she was.
Mhm.
And one of her assignments for students was to pinpoint some of the Green Book historical sites. And they located about 362 different sites throughout North Carolina. But at the same time, you have the North Carolina Arts Preservation Society. They too were identifying different buildings that were part of that movement. And so for us, the North Carolina African American Commission is loaded with so many researchers. Loaded with so many other commissioners that are just eager to connect with anyone that is exploring about the history of buildings, of art, of African Americans. And so this was a good fit for us to provide the next step. And that's when the researchers, and I'm sure Lisa was involved in some way, she can give us more information about that, really set out to explore how could we extend this throughout North Carolina.
Mhm.
And the commission has done a good job. I was fortunate enough to be able to be part of a presentation in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I'm sure other commissioners did the same thing in their hometown or other areas in North Carolina. So that's how we got on board, just joining the efforts of others that initiated this project.
Thank you for that. And we are happy to be a part of it. I think we are going to switch to Lisa now in terms of when she came into the project. But I would first love to hear from Lisa. For those who are unfamiliar with what the Green Book is and have heard the story from Dr. Rhodes, but could use a more official definition, how would you describe the Green Book?
Sure, Lacey. So the Green Book was a small booklet that was published by Victor Green. He was a postal worker in Harlem, New York. It was published between 1936 through 1966. And as Dr. Rhodes alluded to earlier, It did contain listings of various places such as barbershops, beauty salons, restaurants, to name a few, where African Americans would be welcome. Its main purpose was to help African Americans avoid encounters of racial discrimination that were common during the Jim Crow era. And so again, it was a small booklet. It contained places for all 48 continental United States, as well as places abroad as well. And so it was expansive in geographical scope.
Mhm. And so how did you get involved into this particular process? You had heard about the commission working on the Green Book here, and then how did you join in?
The commission put
Mhm.
out a call for a research historian to join the team in working on the project. And so I was looking for a professional development opportunity, saw that it matched my interests. Again, I'm a historian of African American 20th century history. And so I applied and was accepted to be a part of the team.
Mhm. And they're so lucky to have you. So I wanted to, in terms of looking at the larger play, looking at North Carolina and the Green Book, what sites do we know that existed that relate to the Green Book that would have existed in that pamphlet? Lisa.
And North Carolina has 100 counties, and so there were 33 that had places that are listed in the Green Book, and these span from cities such as Raleigh and Greensboro to even less populated areas such as Bladensboro and Hamlet, North Carolina. And so the types of places span the categories from taxi companies to restaurants, hotels specifically were in there for a number of places, as well as barbershops and beauty salons. And so there was a wide variety of places listed in almost every category when the Green Book did publish the different entries according to category.
Mhm. And so when we're looking today at these sites, are they still there? What stands in those places today?
So from the research that was done by Dr. McGill, who was mentioned earlier, and the research that was conducted with the commission, unfortunately, majority of the physical structures have long been demolished in many of the places across the state of North Carolina. Today, many of those addresses that were included in the Green Book are either vacant grass lots, sometimes they are pavement, current parking lots, or parking garage. And in some places, particularly in Charlotte, there are actually athletic venues that have been built on top of those areas. But fortunately, there are a few that still exist, either the physical structure or the business itself. For example, in Kinston, North Carolina, you have Dove's Auto Service. Not only is the business still in operation by the same family, as when it was listed in the Green Book, but they still operate the business in the same structure at the same address. But for other places such as the Plaza Manor Hotel, which was in Greensboro, that business no longer is in operation, but the physical building still stands and it's currently an apartment at this time. And so while majority are no longer in existence, we do have a few across the state that still exist in some form or fashion.
Thank you. And a good way to learn about where those buildings are is to check out the websites for the Green Book run by the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. Lots of information there. Really want to advertise that pretty hard today. But I do want to sort of, when we look back at these Green Book sites and where they were, there's a lot of opportunities for Black people to gather and have all sorts of experiences that are considerably safer than places that were not listed in the Green Book. So I'm thinking about what kind of community opportunities exist. This is a question for the both of you. What kind of community opportunities exist within the Green Book that we can see?
I can go ahead.
I'm thinking. And go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say to your point, Lacey, about community building and where do we see that within the Green Book. Some of the places that were listed in the Green Book were places where community did gather. So for example, for several of the hotels in the Green Book, such as the Arcade in Raleigh, the Biltmore in Durham, they weren't just places where travelers could stay overnight, but they were spaces where businesses and organizations would often hold meetings and functions and social events as well. And so I would say, for a short answer about some of these same spaces were communal spaces where the community tended to gather.
And I can't think, in Wilmington, there are some buildings, there are structures that need renovation, and where barbershops and beauty shops were listed in the book. And those places are now in the hands of families or in the process of being renovated.
Mhm. And that's wonderful. We'd love to see that process continue and grow
Yes.
further.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
that's important.
Absolutely.
I was just about to say the importance of Black American maintaining, renovating, and keeping their properties.
Mhm.
Right now, you find a regentrification of those properties.
Mhm.
And I have talked to many families about assistant projects and keeping their properties and keeping them so it can be a lesson or a story for many of our students today.
Mhm. No, that's absolutely correct.
If many, and when Lisa and I were talking about the Green Book before, I was amazed that many adults didn't know about the Green Book.
Mhm.
And many of the young African Americans didn't know about the Green Book. And those are the kinds of things that the North Carolina African American Commission look for. And we bring them to the front, provide research, provide information, go into the schools, go into the community, and tell the story.
Mhm.
We must maintain the story. It's part of our history.
Mhm.
And if we
You're
don't do it, it may disappear.
Mhm.
And it is disappearing.
Mhm. A crucial lesson for us all going forward in terms of family properties and stories to seek out.
Yes.
But I'm glad you brought up research, because I think a question that we'll get a lot is how you can search for stories about the Green Book. So Lisa, can you tell us a bit about your research process and your methods for getting these stories?
Sure, yes, Lacey. And so I would first like to acknowledge that there was a team of people who helped to do the research for that. And I want to acknowledge that because some of the things that we were able to do to gather the stories would not have been possible if multiple people had not been involved. But I would say that there were 5 broad categories, if you will, as far as how you can think of the ways in that we did gather this information. That was through field research, by hosting and going to community events, by producing, not producing, but facilitating oral histories, through programming, and by going to archives. And so with each of these broader categories, there are different techniques that we use. So for example, when it comes to, when I say field research, we had opportunities as we were meeting with and engaging with community members who offered to drive us around. This was pre-COVID. And so we were able to drive around with community members and see the actual places where some of the Green Book listings once stood or still stood, and we learned stories that way that informed not only the research but the way that the exhibit was curated, as well as when we were out in the field we took pictures. And so there are 2 images within the exhibit that actually use some of the images that we took while out in the field, of buildings that were still are still standing in the state of North Carolina. I would say for most of what visitors will see in the exhibit, the primary way we were able to collect those images and the quotes that are there was through oral history and doing digitization or community archiving. We did a lot of home visits across the state of North Carolina as we were able to network and meet community members through our programming. And by attending programs, oftentimes we were able to form positive relationships with community members, have ongoing conversations that led to recording their stories. And using a strategy that I learned through UNC Chapel Hill, I would often carry a backpack. And in that backpack, I would have an audio recorder, a scanner, and a laptop. And oftentimes what would happen was in the process of telling the stories, there would oftentimes be photo albums that we brought out, other documents that were brought out. We want to show us the things that help to tell the story. And so while they're recorded the story, but it also digitized a lot of the things that were being shared to us by community members. And so in highlighting some of the things that are in the exhibit, panels 3 through 6 talk about specific Green Book locations across the state of North Carolina. For those panels, there are about 15 images that were used. 2 of them were taken by members of the team who are doing field research. 4 of them came from institutional archives, but the remaining 9, which is most of them, came directly from working from descendants and community members while doing the home visits. And so just kind of give some example of where do we get this information from that was used to curate the exhibit that's at the site today.
Absolutely, yeah, and those are all very crucial. I'm glad you highlighted the team as well, because it is not a one-person effort in putting something like this together. It never is. Something I'd like to learn a little bit more about, and I think our audience would appreciate, is the importance of trust in gathering these oral histories. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit on that.
Yes, definitely. And so the community members that we worked with quite a bit are the individuals who lived during the Jim Crow era, and they remember that period of time very well. And so when we were going out in the communities and meeting community members, it was important for us to be upfront, especially since this is a project being sponsored by a state agency. It was really important because, like I mentioned, many of the community members, they remember what happened, how it happened. And so being able to be upfront as far as who we are, myself as a researcher, the commission as an agency, what is this project? Why are we doing it? What's going to happen to this information? It was really important because unfortunately for a long period of time, minority communities tended to not be involved in different activities that document history and culture. And so while I do want to emphasize and recognize colleagues of mine who are doing this work today, for this particular generation, they remember decades ago when this did not happen. And so gaining trust was a huge thing. And I should also acknowledge that just because a person is African-American does not automatically mean that they're automatically going to be trusted. And so myself and some of my teammates on the research team, there were many times we had to answer a lot of questions from who are we? Where'd you grow up? Where's your background? Where'd you go to school? Because all of that is a part of, here is someone new. We want to check you out and be like, why do you want to know this information? Because this is important. And so out of definitely respecting the importance of history and culture within a community, because something that often will define a community, being able to answer those questions and garner trust, it was a huge part of this project.
I appreciate you delving into that, because I think it's something that we people don't often understand, people who haven't done these oral histories, or people who haven't experienced history with that kind of importance. They being able to just say it and tell another person is not an easy thing, as well as to be trusted that that other person or other people will get the story right. So I'm glad we could touch on that in particular. Do you have a response to that, Deloris, before I move forward? I saw you nodding.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, Lisa, Dr. Withers. Well, I'm not quite sure. Lisa right now. Many Black Americans are not quite trustful of a stranger coming in, asking questions about their property. Too many times, one comes in, asks the question, they give them information, and all of a sudden, how did I lose my property? So I have found you must be aware and don't give out too much information. That's what it all boiled down to.
I'm glad.
And you're right. It is trust, building up a relationship.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you for that. So we are living in 2021, and so during this process, a pandemic occurred, and I would like to know how that changed your roles in this project. It might have been there might have been some bumps in the road that occurred with a lot of socially distancing and maybe archives not having the same hours that they previously did. How did the pandemic and
Yeah.
our response influence the way the exhibit moved forward?
Well, we are very fortunate to have an outstanding director of the North Carolina Heritage Commission, Dr. Thorpe, Angela Thorpe. And she's very creative in providing digital opportunities, realizing that we are aware of other people and their health and distancing. And so many projects are available to all of us through digital works. And she has kept her staff together. She's kept us connected, providing all these opportunities for us to communicate digitally. Nothing has slowed down. Lisa, what about your part? I know you haven't slowed down either.
No, well, actually, my role ended earlier in 2020, and so when the pandemic really started to kick up was when my duties was ending, and so
Yeah.
I do definitely defer to Mrs. Rhodes, Commissioner Rhodes' response
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, really, nothing has slowed down. Um, just last night, I got an interesting email about a variety of digital programs and what's going on and who's there and who's here. So we are doing the best we can, and the governor and the Office of Natural and Cultural Resources as well are all providing all of the resources that we need to keep these projects in front of people.
Mhm. And that's an important aspect of it, because having the stories front and center and making it available to people opens up so
Right.
many additional, it's such an important thing, as well as the safety and creativity of the people doing the work.
Yes, you have to
So
be creative.
always.
Always.
So I realize we are running kind of low on time on our questions. So I'm going to do two more, and I think we're going to then open it up for the people who are watching this on Facebook or in our Zoom. So there's been a lot of media and interest about the Green Book stories in the last couple of years. Do either of you have any ideas about why these have been bubbling up a bit more recently?
Well, I can understand why you would find or have a need to have information about the Green Book, because with the climate of the country, Black Americans and all Americans really have to be careful as to where they go. But now with not only racism, not even with the virus, all of these factors are coming into play. So you are communicating with others just the way we did. Where is it safe to stay? Where is it safe to dine? Where is it safe to be able to stop to go to the bathroom? It reflects the culture of the Green Book. Interestingly, how this has come around in so many ways. Uh, being cautious, being aware and sharing the story with others that are passing through those same roads. So that's what we have to be aware of today.
Thank you. Lisa, do you have a response?
I do. I actually think that increased awareness of the Green Book is twofold for two different groups. I remember when the feature film came out in theaters about 2 years ago. It definitely brought heightened awareness among the general public as far as what it was, spurred interest to learn more about it. And at the same time, the Smithsonian produced a documentary about it that also drew a lot of attention as well. So I think having uh, products in the realm of the visual arts drew attention about it. And but I recall, even for myself, I mentioned earlier that I didn't learn about the Green Book until I read about the commission doing this project. And when I went to a major conference for my profession, when I was first starting out, there was a panel about Green Book. So there were also other states, other institutions that were also doing research, starting projects on it as well. And I think that's another way how interest has grown over the past few years as other people learn about other places doing similar work and realizing the importance, and especially since the Green Book was such a national and even international publication, understanding like, okay, this is something we definitely need to research and document while we can before even more is lost, and unfortunately what has in the decades since it ceased publication.
Mhm. So for those who are watching this panel, again, thank you for coming, but it's also a call out to you to further look for these stories, to look for Green Book sites, to interact with the panel, with the digital exhibit that we have today, but to look for ways in which the Green Book intersects with your life, because I think for those who are learning about it right now, there are aspects that you didn't even consider that are connecting to you today. So I wanted to end with the hard question of favorite aspects about working on this project for either of you. And I know it is hard to pick favorites, so I will say your favorite right now, if there's a favorite story that you learned about, a favorite event in the process of connecting with this. I'd love to hear about what some favorite parts.
I was say, go ahead,
Go ahead,
Commissioner
go
Rhodes.
ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. No, I would say for me, it was being able to work directly with community members to learn a variety of different narratives of travel, moving one physical body from one place to another, as well as the descendants. We were fortunate to be able to connect with several um, community members whose parents or grandparents or even uncles, aunts, uncles, aunts and uncles operated these places. And so while oftentimes many of these stories revolve around what we may categorize as leisure travel. As a narrative that I discovered that I find is unique and one that I like to talk about is how some of these business owners who operate the places listed in the Green Book move for socioeconomic reasons. Many people may come from a more rural area, grew up on farms, but were able to move to another location in the state and become entrepreneurs and start businesses. And so I think one of the things that is powerful about this exhibit is how we're able to push some of the interpretive boundaries, if you will, and tell additional stories about Black travel and how that looked. Because African Americans are diverse. We all have diverse experiences. We come from diverse backgrounds. And so being able to use a different lens or a combination of lenses to tell their story really reflects the diversity of African American experience in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And I have
Rhodes?
found the African American, and looking at not looking at the families that knew their parents had this beauty shop or barber shop or restaurant. And it breaks my heart to see that many of the property owners have lost their property, or many of other Blacks would not patronize them because when they found larger or historic white organizations that had a larger place, they would rather go there. So because Black Americans had so little money in their property or money in general, it made it very difficult for them to expand their property, to connect.
Mhm.
And I was reading last night that even with the automobile, Black Americans had some mobility. They could move out of the area, try to set up another business in a predominantly white area and get no patronage. So it's been very hard for us to anchor, project, and move our businesses forward. And I asked why. And it goes back to the need for the Green Book. It goes back to the era of transportation. It goes back to even the pandemic. Our businesses are the ones that are folding now. You ask why. I continue to ask why. And I think the answer is very clear.
And thank you for that. I want to thank you both again for your time in speaking with us. These are all such amazing and important stories that I'm glad we were able to share with our audience today. I want to thank the Commission again for sponsoring this panel and for the exhibit. And then I'm going to dip into the comments, I think, for questions. I think we had one early on in this. Oh, no, we were asking for questions. We'll give them another few minutes to see if they have any questions coming up.
Lacey, we do have a question from Facebook.
Okay.
Leslie wants to know if the commission is still working on gathering oral histories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Lisa left us in 2020, as she said, but we continue to look for oral histories. We could continue to look for any stories that can bring about the history and the preservation of our culture.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So if there was someone who's watching this right now and has a story that they would like to contribute, what is the best way for them to get involved?
Well, I think the first thing they need to do is to reach out for our director, Angela Thorpe. And her office number is area code 919-814-6511. And I'm sure Dr. Thorpe can take it from there.
I think she can. She's very capable.
Very
Do we have any other questions?
We do not.
Okay. Let me ask a couple of the ones that I didn't get to ask, and then we'll see if any come up. But let's do that. Oh God, I mixed up all these papers. So we talked about the community building that exists within Green Book sites. And we can see that with political advocacy as well as business ownership. I think one of the things that I found most fascinating in learning about the Green Book from this exhibit was the opportunities of entertainment that exist within the Green Book sites. And that's a story that I definitely didn't know more about. Can you guys tell me a bit more about that?
You know, there was a story recently in the Washington Post, matter of fact, and it centered on North Carolina. And there was a place called the Barn in Wilmington, and it opened in the 1940s. It existed until the 60s, and it was one of the sites where there was a white man, and I forgot his name right now, that helped many of the African American leaders in Wilmington bring in noted artists to Wilmington. And Blacks would team together or catch a bus ride or a train, because we had a train coming into Wilmington. We had buses coming into Wilmington, or catch rides with those that had cars. And they would have a wonderful time at a site called the Barn in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I'm sure there are other sites in North Carolina just like that. And also they, during the era of the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were places and old buildings that many African Americans would have recreated with a jukebox and soft drinks and nabs and whatever. And we created our own entertainment. So with lots of music always and dancing. And that was part of the generation where it was so-called separate but equal, so-called. We made our own entertainment.
Mm-hmm. And those are stories that we can find out a lot about on our exhibit and on the website as well, the digital exhibit that exists. But I think it's the idea of safety for the Green Book, I think, is something that people find hard to understand, but the idea of entertainment being found in there as well, existing in the same space.
Well,
mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Any comment, Lisa?
I'm just thinking of several examples from specific Green Book locations. I think along with what Commissioner Rhodes was saying, I'm thinking specifically about Thornton's in Goldsboro, North Carolina. When driving around the Goldsboro area within community elder, he was able to shed some light on a confusing listing, because if you look in the actual Green Book itself, some entries listed as Thornton's shaving parlor, I believe, and others listed as Thornton's teenage, which is kind of confusing because you're like, what's going on here? But he explained that Eugene Thornton was a community member in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and he owned a building. And one half of the building operated as a barbershop where you can go get your hair cut, get a shave. But the other half of the building did have a jukebox, and it was known as an area where particularly teens would come and hang out. Have mentorship, be in a safe area, enjoy some music. And so hearing what Commissioner Rhodes was saying, it reminded me of that particular Green Book listing and the function that it played within the community, in providing a safe space and a space of joy as well. Additionally, in terms of entertainment, I'm also thinking about two of the hotel managers. One would be in Asheville. At the time, the listing was under the James Keys Hotel, but the other one is in Durham. The Biltmore Hotel had a number of different owners / managers during the decades, and one of the later ones, him as well as the individual who owned the James Keys Hotel, actually they were promoters. Like, they actively sought out, brought entertainers to their respective areas, and oftentimes those hotels, they had performance venues within them as well, and were places at certain different points in time that community members would gather to listen to entertainment, go see performances and of that nature. And so to your point, Lacey, it's very interesting to see the interconnection between entertainment, both on a more professional level, but even community spaces for like a local teen hangout. The Green Book.
I always find it interesting when a local teen hangout becomes like a historic and meaningful space, because I think as teenagers, we don't often think of it that way, but very much this was an important space, not only for those kids to be able to have a space for themselves, but to be in a safe space more than anything else. And there's so many connections that could be made today, honestly, in those same concerns with just kids being able to be themselves, but also be able to be safe in that same space. I think we are running toward the end of our time. Do
Because
we
you
have any-
notice,
Go ahead.
one more thing.
Please, go ahead.
There were no community centers for Black youth.
Yes.
And when Lisa mentioned Goldsboro, I thought, well, Seymour Johnson was an Air Force base. And that was one that probably would be prime for having many of the enlisted men and, well, probably men then, go there for entertainment. That was a safe place for them. That I just thought about that as you were speaking, Lisa. I'm sorry.
No, that absolutely. And I'm glad you got to put that in. I think I could talk to the both of you forever about this. But I think our time is running low. So I want to thank you again for participating, for your work in the commission and your research. I want to encourage everyone to come to our site and see this exhibit, but also to go to the website. So if it's going to be at a place near to you in the future, it's going to be traveling around for the rest of this year. I believe our exhibit is going to be going to the Magnolia House in Greensboro next. So keep an eye on them and their social media. Our next panel will be later today with people from the Magnolia House, which was a Green Book site in Greensboro. I'll be talking to some UNCG students and professors and the Magnolia House about that site and their work there and telling that story. Thank you for staying with us today.
It was a joy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Lacey.